It happened on Thanksgiving night. The day meant for gratitude turned into the night I lost everything. My daughter-in-law accused me of stealing her diamond necklace, and before I could defend myself, my own son pushed me out of the house without a second thought. I stood in the freezing dark, humiliated and alone, but fate had its own plan, one that would expose the real thief. My name is Diana Miller, and I'm 65 years old. I have learned that a life can feel both full and empty at the same time, full of years, recipes, and memories, and empty of the people you thought would stay. Seattle is like that too. The streets damp with mist even when the sky looks harmless, the air kind while the wind is sharp. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke to the smell of rain and the small click of my late husband's watch as I fastened it around my wrist, the one sound that always makes me feel steady. I still talk to him sometimes, quietly, as I fold dish towels or measure flour. You'd laugh at how serious everyone takes their table settings now, I whispered, smiling to no one. Downstairs, the kitchen light was a soft square on the tile. I tied my apron and started the apple pie. Nothing fancy, just the way I've made it since I was 22. Butter cold, apples tart, cinnamon measured with the heart. The house itself felt too clean, too polished, like a hotel waiting for guests. It was my son's house, but a stranger's taste. White marble, chrome, thin vases with branches that belonged to no season. I set the pie on the counter and opened the window to let the steam out. The rain made a sound like applause on the sill. Mom. Hannah's voice floated in before she did. She entered with her arms crossed, eyes traveling first to the oven, then to the flour on my hands. You know I ordered catering, right? We can't have extras. It ruins the balance. She smiled in that way people do, when they mean the opposite of kindness. I thought a homemade pie couldn't hurt, I said, keeping my voice soft. It's Thanksgiving. That's exactly the point, she replied, moving to rearrange a stack of monogrammed napkins. We're doing it properly this year. The guests are particular. She adjusted one napkin by a fraction. Please don't clutter the dining room with personal touches. In another life, in another kitchen, I might have teased her, made a joke until we found a place to meet in the middle. But we never did meet in the middle. With Hannah, there was only the center she chose and the edges where everyone else stood. Of course, I said. I lifted the pie with a dish towel and kept it in the kitchen, out of sight. Tradition can survive behind a door. Love has done it for centuries. Ryan came in a few minutes later, carrying a box of candles. His smile went straight to my heart, even at 35. Hey, Ma, he said, kissing my temple. You up early again? He saw the pie and grinned. I knew it. Hannah isn't thrilled, I said lightly, and he winced apologetically. She just wants it to be perfect, he murmured, as if translating a language he didn't entirely speak. You know how she gets with events. I know, I said. I never remind him that I held his fear at night when his father was sick, that I learned to stretch money and time until they both obeyed. I don't count the ways love has already been paid. Mothers who keep books that way only bankrupt themselves. By noon, the house smelled like rosemary and something glossy from the caterers. Hannah moved through the rooms in soft heels, tapping a list on her phone with her thumbnail. I carried plates, polished glasses, tucked stray threads from the table runner. Lower the lights 2%. She directed toward no one and everyone. Ryan pretended not to hear. I found the dimmer switch and turned it carefully, stopping when the room looked gentler. Hannah nodded, as if I had finally said something correct. In the mirror by the hallway, I checked myself. Navy dress, pearl earrings, the small gold cross I wear when I need courage. I pressed the watch again, feeling the tick like a hand squeezing mine. On the console table lay a velvet jewelry box, black, discreet, expensive. The lid was open just enough to reveal a flash of white fire. Hannah's diamond necklace, sharp as ice. I closed the lid without touching it. Some things are safer quiet. The doorbell began to ring in polite waves. Guests arrived like a tide of fragrance and laughter, women in satin and winter lipstick, men in jackets that matched their shoes. Greetings turned into comparisons. Where did you source the floral arch? Is the chef local or flown in? And somewhere beneath the small talk, there was the humming of a machine that runs on approval. I balanced trays, I made room. I smiled at strangers who shook my hand as if it were a formality, not a person. Diana, isn't it? A woman asked, her bracelets chiming. Ryan's mother. How lovely that you're still around to see all this.
She meant well.
People often do when they don't think very hard. I retreated to the kitchen for a breath and found the pie waiting like an old friend. I cut a small slice and hid it on a saucer near the window. My first bite tasted like the home I carried inside me. When I returned to the dining room, the velvet jewelry box on the console had moved. Its lid was fully closed now, centered perfectly. It was a small detail, but it touched some thread of unease I refused to pull. Places. Hannah sang, clapping once. The room obeyed. Candles steadied. Silver flashed. The turkey arrived like a performance, and everyone lifted their phones to record gratitude. Ryan took a seat at the head, Hannah at his right, and mine waited at the far end, as if the distance could organize us into newer roles. I walked the length of the table, eyes skimming crystal, plates, the careful symmetry of a life curated to impress. Mom, Ryan said softly as I passed him. He touched my hand under the edge of the tablecloth, the way a little boy touches his mother's coat in a crowd. Thank you for helping today.
He meant it.
I smiled back, small and real, and took my place. Hannah stood, glass lifted, the diamond necklace now bright at her throat, catching the candlelight as if it owned the room. To family, she said, her voice warm and amplified. To gratitude. Her gaze brushed past me like I was a picture already seen. Laughter, gentle applause, the ceremonial clink of glass to glass. And then we began to eat, carefully, admiringly, like people do when they know the price of what's on their plates. I ate slowly, the way old habits teach you to make things last. The necklace sparkled when she turned her head, a small constellation that kept finding the corner of my eye. Outside, rain stitched silver lines down the window. Inside, the room glowed as if nothing in it had ever been broken. Later, the caterers cleared courses and brought out the pumpkin tart Hannah preferred over any pie. People praised the crust as if praise were currency. I thought of the slice cooling in the kitchen and felt a private warmth. Gratitude can be a quiet thing. It doesn't need an audience. From the end of the table, I watched my son laugh at a story I couldn't hear. I memorized the curve of his smile the way I used to memorize his spelling words. The diamond flashed again at Hannah's throat as she leaned close to whisper something in his ear, and for a moment, just a moment, I wished jewels could measure kindness the way they measure light. The evening folded forward. The talk turned louder and looser. Someone asked about holiday travel, someone else about investments. Hannah excused herself to the hallway, passing the console table where the velvet box had been.
She didn't look at it.
The candles burned lower, making everyone lovelier and less honest. If I had known then what the night was waiting to become, I might have asked for the lights a little higher, the voices a little softer, the world a little kinder. But stories do not ask us what we want before they turn. They simply turn. The night deepened the way Seattle nights do, slowly, quietly, as if the darkness were just another guest slipping through the door. Candles flickered over half-empty plates. Laughter softened into the low hum of expensive wine. I remember thinking how beautiful everything looked, how fragile peace can seem when you're standing right inside it. Hannah was radiant in her silver dress, the diamond necklace blazing at her throat, catching every bit of light as though it were feeding on attention itself. She stood up, a hand at her chest. Wait. Her voice sliced through the chatter. My necklace. It's gone. The room stilled. Chairs creaked. Someone set a glass down too fast. She pressed her fingers along her neck again, searching the empty spot where the jewels had been. It was just here, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. For one absurd second, I thought she must be joking. But then her eyes found mine. You were near the hallway earlier, weren't you, Diana? Her tone was sugar dipped in ice. I blinked, unsure how to respond. Yes, I passed by to refill the water, I said. My voice felt too small for the room. She turned to Ryan. You saw, didn't you? Mom was carrying something. The guests exchanged looks that said everything they didn't dare speak. The hum of conversation didn't return this time. It curdled into judgment. I felt heat rise under my skin as all eyes moved toward me. I didn't take anything, I managed. Maybe it slipped. Mom. Ryan interrupted, half standing, his face tight with embarrassment. Just tell us if you picked it up by mistake. Please. Let's not make this worse. The words landed heavier than I think he meant them to. For 35 years I had been his certainty, his refuge, and now he was begging me to confess to something I hadn't done, because it was easier than believing his wife might lie. I would never steal, I said quietly. Not from anyone, least of all from you. Hannah covered her mouth, feigning tears. Ryan, she's saying I'm lying, she sobbed, turning away. The performance was perfect. Two of her friends rose to comfort her. One murmured, It's okay, sweetie. She's older. Maybe she's confused. The humiliation burned through me like fever. My hands shook on the tablecloth. I'm not confused, I said, louder this time. Ryan looked at me as if trying to find the mother he knew somewhere inside the woman the room was painting. Mom, he said again, softer now but deadlier. Please just go upstairs. We'll sort this out. I shook my head.
No, Ryan.
I won't hide. He sighed, rubbed his face, then gestured toward the door. Then go.
Please.
You're making a scene. That's when I felt the push, not violent but final. His hand brushed my arm to steer me away, and the air left my lungs. My chair scraped the floor, the last sound I owned in that house. I don't remember walking to the door. I remember the cold, though, the kind that bites through fabric and memory alike. Outside, rain had turned the driveway into silver threads under the porch light. I stood there in disbelief, the laughter resuming behind the closed door like a curtain falling after the play. I had nowhere to go but forward. I walked until my shoes filled with water, until the lights of their house blurred into stars through my tears. Each step felt heavier than the last, but still I kept moving, repeating one truth under my breath. I didn't steal anything. I didn't. When I finally reached the corner, I looked back once. Through the window, I could still see her, the glitter at her throat replaced by a triumphant smile, and my son beside her, head bowed, as if guilt could masquerade as grace. The night had taken everything from me but the promise that one day, somehow, it would give something back. The next morning, Seattle's sky was gray and endless, the kind that makes the streets look like mirrors. I woke up on a park bench near the waterfront, wrapped in my old coat, clutching my purse like a lifeline. The world moved around me. People rushing to work, a child feeding pigeons, a jogger with music in his ears, but no one saw me. I was invisible, and maybe that was easier. I walked for hours until I found a small senior housing center with a vacancy sign in the window. The woman at the front desk looked at me kindly, but didn't ask questions. She gave me a room key, and I nodded like I still knew how to exist. The room was tiny, a bed, a window, a lamp that buzzed when it turned on, but it was mine. I sat down and listened to the rain tapping softly against the glass. I didn't cry right away. Tears take courage sometimes, and I didn't have any left that day. For the first time in my life, I didn't have anyone to cook for. No reason to wake early, no table to set. I spent the first few days in silence, watching the clock hands move, the sound echoing like footsteps in an empty hallway. I thought about Ryan constantly, his eyes when he looked at me that night, torn between love and loyalty, and how easily loyalty won. I replayed every scene in my head. Hannah's trembling voice, the gasps of the guests, the way Ryan's hand pushed me toward the door. I tried to find one sign, one warning I'd missed. But betrayal doesn't always come in storms. Sometimes it slips quietly into the house and waits until you notice what's gone. The days bled into each other. I began walking to the park each morning, carrying a cup of weak coffee from the vending machine. I would sit near the same bench where I'd spent that first night and feed the birds crumbs from the stale rolls they gave us at breakfast. The seagulls didn't judge me. The sky didn't ask for proof. One afternoon, I saw a young couple taking pictures by the pier. They laughed, holding each other, her necklace glinting in the light. Something twisted in my chest, sharp and deep. I looked away and whispered, "It's not about the necklace. It's about the trust that broke with it." Sometimes, at night, I'd imagine knocking on their door again, facing them both, screaming until they understood. But then I'd remember Ryan's face, the way his voice cracked when he said, "Please, Mom, just go." He hadn't said get help or stay safe. He'd said go. And so I did. A week passed, then two. No call. No visit. The silence grew thick enough to drown in. Each morning, I'd wake up hoping maybe he'd realize the truth, that maybe guilt had softened him. But my phone stayed still. No messages. No apology. Just the quiet breathing of regret. One evening, I found a church near the corner of Main and Pine. Its doors were open, candles flickering inside. I sat in the last pew and closed my eyes. The air smelled of old wood and mercy. I whispered, "If I did something wrong in this life, please forgive me. But I swear, I didn't steal that necklace." My voice trembled, the words breaking in the middle like glass. The priest saw me crying and came closer. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. I smiled through the tears. "Yes, Father. I just lost something precious." He nodded gently. "Then you'll find it again. Truth has a way of returning home." Those words stayed with me long after I left. I didn't know then that they were more than comfort. They were prophecy. Because while I sat in that small, quiet chapel, far away in another part of the city, fate was already beginning to stir. A phone would soon be left behind in a car. A message would light up a dark screen. And the truth, long buried under lies, was about to wake up. It was a gray afternoon, one of those dull Seattle days when the clouds hang so low they feel like they're pressing down on you. I was sitting by the window of my tiny room, watching raindrops slide down the glass, when I wondered if Ryan still thought of me. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. My heart wanted to believe he was just confused, that maybe someday he'd knock on my door and say, "Mom, I'm sorry." But the silence had gone on too long, and hope was beginning to rot. Across town, Ryan was driving. He'd offered to take Hannah to her salon appointment because she said her car needed servicing. He kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, quiet as usual. Hannah scrolled through her phone beside him, sighing dramatically about her appointment, about traffic, about how he really should have hired a driver by now. When they reached the salon, she leaned over and kissed his cheek. "You don't have to wait. I'll text you when I'm done." She tossed her handbag over her shoulder and stepped out, leaving her perfume and her phone behind. The screen lit up as she closed the door, but Ryan didn't notice at first. He stared out at the rain-streaked windshield for several minutes, lost in his thoughts. Maybe he was remembering that night, maybe he wasn't. He would later tell me that the car was completely silent until that sound broke it.
Ping.
It was sharp and unexpected, echoing in the small space. Ryan frowned and glanced toward the passenger seat. Hannah's phone was still there, the screen glowing faintly through the notifications. Out of habit, he picked it up. He wasn't snooping, just curious. But one notification caught his eye. Payment received, $4,500 from Diamond Exchange Seattle. His heartbeat stumbled. He tapped it once, then again, to make sure he wasn't imagining it. The message opened into a thread of texts, short and transactional. Jeweler. Payment confirmed. Necklace received. Thank you. Hannah. Appreciate it. Please delete all photos. My husband can't know. Ryan stared, his mind a whirl of disbelief and nausea. His fingers trembled as he scrolled up and saw the timestamp, November 22nd, the day before Thanksgiving. There were even pictures, blurry but unmistakable, the same diamond necklace laid out on a velvet cloth. His breath hitched. The world outside the car blurred, rain, streetlights, and guilt all blending into one painful haze. He whispered to himself, "Oh, God, she did it. She really did it." He dropped the phone onto the seat as though it burned him. For a moment, he couldn't move. Every heartbeat was a memory. His mother's trembling hands, her pleading eyes, the sound of his own voice telling her to leave. Shame flooded him, so heavy it felt physical. He picked up the phone again, scrolling through the rest of the messages. More exchanges with the jeweler, receipts, even a photo of Hannah holding the velvet box before she mailed it. Everything was there. The truth, so clean and sharp it could cut through all the lies. Without thinking, he started the car. Tires hissed on wet asphalt as he drove, faster than he should have. He didn't know where Hannah was, didn't care. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, they turned white. All he could see in his mind was his mother's face that night, shocked, hurt, destroyed by his doubt. He parked outside my senior home, rain still pounding the windshield. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at his reflection in the glass. He didn't recognize himself, the man who'd thrown his mother out to protect a lie. He wiped his face with his sleeve, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the rain. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, soaked and shaking, my heart almost stopped. His eyes were red, and his voice broke before the words even came.
Mom.
I was wrong. I froze. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. His voice trembled again. It was Hannah. I found everything, the messages, the photos, the payments. She sold her necklace. She framed you. He couldn't finish. I wanted to speak, but my throat closed. For weeks, I'd prepared myself for every possibility, except this one. I took a step forward, searching his face. Ryan, I whispered. Look at me. Are you sure? He nodded, tears finally spilling over. I saw it all. I believed her, and I threw you out. I don't deserve your forgiveness. The air between us felt heavier than rain. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, I reached out and touched his face, the same way I used to when he was a boy, scared of thunderstorms. You don't need forgiveness, Ryan, I said quietly. You need to fix what's broken. He nodded like a child again. I will. I swear I will. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without crying. The truth had finally woken up, and it was no longer whispering. It was ready to speak. The next morning, the sky was pale and calm, the kind of soft light that follows a long storm. I sat by the window of my small room, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee, when I heard a knock on the door. It was Ryan. His hair was still damp from the rain, and his eyes looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. He was carrying a folder in one hand and Hannah's phone in the other. Can I come in? He asked quietly, as if he needed permission to step back into my life. I nodded. You're already here, son. He walked inside slowly, looking around the tiny room that held my new world, the single chair, the lamp, the small table with a vase of wilted flowers. His throat tightened when he saw the photo of his father on the nightstand. He picked it up, ran his thumb across the frame, and whispered, Dad would hate me right now. I stood beside him, the hurt still buried somewhere between heartbreak and understanding. Your father would never hate you, I said softly. But he'd tell you the same thing I will. Truth always finds its way home, no matter how late it arrives. Ryan sat down, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. Mom, I can't believe I did that to you. I threw you out in front of everyone because she said a few words, and I didn't even question it. You were crying, and his voice cracked. I still chose her over you. The weight of his guilt filled the room. I wanted to tell him it was all right, but it wasn't. Some things need to be felt to be understood. I took a slow breath. Ryan, you didn't just choose her. You chose what was easier to believe. Lies are loud, they demand attention. But truth, I touched my chest. Truth is quiet. You have to be willing to listen. He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. I'm listening now. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the small wall clock. Then, carefully, he opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots of the jeweler's messages, bank transactions, and photos of the necklace being packed and sold. Every piece of the puzzle lay in neat, painful order. I want to make this right, he said. We'll go to the police. We'll take her to court. She doesn't get to destroy you and walk away like nothing happened. I looked at him, my son, broken and rebuilding in the same breath. This isn't about revenge, Ryan. It's about the truth. And the truth doesn't need anger. It needs courage. He nodded slowly. Then we'll do it your way. That afternoon, we went to the police station together. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and second chances. Ryan did most of the talking. He explained everything, handed over the evidence, the messages, the timestamps, the bank receipts. The officer listening to him raised an eyebrow when he saw the proof. This is strong evidence, he said. You'll want to contact an attorney. Fraud, defamation, and false accusation. That's a serious case. I didn't speak much during the meeting. I just sat beside Ryan, my hands clasped in my lap, letting the moment wash over me. For weeks, I'd lived in silence, stripped of dignity. Now, that silence was finally turning into something else, strength. Outside the station, Ryan exhaled, his voice trembling with relief. I don't care what it takes, Mom. I'll stand beside you every step of the way. I smiled faintly. That's all I ever needed, Ryan, not your defense, just your belief. That night, back in my room, I looked at my husband's photo again. The corners of my lips lifted slightly. We're going to be all right, I whispered. The truth is finally awake. For the first time since that horrible Thanksgiving, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a mother again. A mother whose voice was about to be heard, not through anger or noise, but through justice. The next few days were filled with paperwork, meetings, and the quiet determination that justice demands. Ryan met with an attorney named Mr. Harper, who promised to handle the case personally. Hearing his calm, confident voice gave me a strange peace. As we left the law office, Ryan asked, "Do you think we'll win?" I looked at the sky, where the gray clouds were finally breaking, letting sunlight through. We don't need to win, son. We just need the truth to speak for itself. The rest will follow. And deep down I knew, this time, the truth wouldn't whisper. It would roar. The courthouse in downtown Seattle was colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning, but the kind that seeps through the walls, the kind built from silence, fear, and the weight of justice waiting to be served. I sat beside Ryan on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He kept glancing at me as if to make sure I was really there, that I hadn't disappeared like a bad dream. "Mom," he whispered, "whatever happens in there, I just want you to know, I'll never doubt you again." I smiled faintly. The hardest part of losing someone's trust isn't the pain, Ryan. It's realizing how quietly it leaves, and how loud the silence feels after. He didn't answer. He just took my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't pull away. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polish. The judge sat high on the bench, her black robe crisp, her expression unreadable. Judge Harper, the same attorney who had taken our case, was now replaced by this firm, steady figure of law. The American flag stood behind her like a witness to everything that had ever been broken and restored here. Hannah sat at the defense table, her once perfect poise unraveling. She looked smaller without the diamond necklace that had once shimmered at her throat. She didn't meet my eyes. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, fingers twitching around a tissue she hadn't used yet. Her lawyer spoke softly in her ear, but she barely seemed to hear him. The bailiff called the room to order, and the trial began. Our attorney began by presenting the evidence, screenshots, bank transfers, and photos. Each one was placed on the screen for the court to see. The first image was a message. Payment received, $4,500 from Diamond Exchange Seattle. A murmur rippled through the room. Then came the photo of the necklace, unmistakable even in its blurred edges. And finally, the message that sealed her fate. "My husband can't know." The judge's brow furrowed slightly as she read. "Mrs. Hannah Miller," she said, her tone calm but cold, "are you prepared to explain this evidence?" Hannah swallowed hard. Her lawyer rose quickly. "Your Honor, my client claims these messages were misinterpreted." But Judge Harper raised a hand to silence him. "Misinterpreted." She leaned forward. The messages clearly show the sale of the item in question, the payment, and acknowledgement that her husband must not know. That is not misinterpretation. That is intent. Ryan closed his eyes, shoulders sagging in shame. I reached for his hand under the table, giving it a small squeeze. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about truth finally breathing. Hannah stood suddenly, her voice trembling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she blurted out. "I just wanted her out of the house. She made me feel small, like I didn't belong. It was just one lie, one stupid lie." Her voice cracked, echoing in the courtroom. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. Judge Harper nodded slowly. That one stupid lie destroyed another person's reputation, home, and dignity. And that is why the law exists, to remind us that our actions have consequences. She looked at the papers before her. The evidence presented leaves no room for doubt. "Hannah Miller, you are found guilty of fraud, false accusation, and defamation. You are sentenced to 2 years in state custody, 6 months of community service, and ordered to pay $20,000 in restitution to Mrs. Diana Miller for damages and emotional distress." The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. Hannah's knees gave way. The bailiff stepped forward, gently guiding her toward the exit. For the first time, she looked at me, her eyes red, lips trembling. I didn't look away. I had cried enough for both of us. As she passed, I whispered softly, not out of hatred, but truth. "You didn't just steal a necklace, Hannah. You stole peace. But peace finds its way back." Ryan turned to me, tears streaking his face. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to make this right." I touched his cheek, brushing away one tear. "You already did, Ryan. You stood beside me when it mattered most." When we stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight was blinding. It poured over the marble steps like a blessing, washing away weeks of darkness. Reporters murmured near the entrance. People whispered as we passed, but I didn't hear any of it. I only heard the rhythm of our footsteps, side by side again, mother and son, walking out not in shame, but in truth. At the bottom of the steps, Ryan stopped and looked at me. "Do you forgive me?" I smiled, a small, tired smile. "Forgiveness isn't something I give," I said softly. "It's something you earn by living better. So start there." He nodded, his eyes full of quiet resolve. As we walked toward the car, I looked back once at the courthouse doors closing behind us. For the first time in a long while, I felt the air fill my lungs without pain. Justice had spoken, not loudly, not cruelly, but with the calm certainty that truth doesn't need to shout. It simply stands. The weeks after the trial felt like waking up from a long nightmare. The noise in my head, the shame, the accusations, the cold echo of that Thanksgiving night, began to fade little by little, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I had moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of Seattle, surrounded by pine trees and soft, endless quiet. The place wasn't big, but it was warm and it was mine. Ryan came every weekend. The first time he arrived, he stood at the doorstep, holding a box of groceries and a pot of daisies. "You always said a house isn't a home without plants," he said with a shy smile. I let him in without a word, but the look in his eyes, the kind that belongs to a child who finally understands his mistake, was enough. He helped me set up the little garden outside. The soil was wet from the rain, cool against our fingers as we planted herbs, tomatoes, and a few marigolds. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't the kind that divides, it was the kind that heals. As we worked, he glanced at me. "Do you ever think about her?" "Hannah?" I asked. He nodded. "She's still in custody. I heard from her lawyer that she's not adjusting well." His voice was heavy with guilt. I pressed the soil around a seedling and said quietly, "She'll have to learn what truth costs when you trade it for comfort." I looked up at him. "But you, Ryan, you've learned what it's worth." He swallowed hard. "I wish I could undo it all. The party, the things I said, the way I looked at you." I smiled faintly. If we spend our lives wishing for time to turn back, we'd never see what's waiting ahead.
Look around you, Ryan.
This is what moving forward looks like. He followed my gaze. The green leaves, the slow sun filtering through them, the smell of earth and new beginnings. You're right, he said softly. Inside, he hung my husband's old watch above the mantel. The one I'd worn that night. The one that never stopped ticking even when everything else had. It still works, Ryan said, listening to the faint click. Guess some things are stronger than time. We had dinner together that evening, simple roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, the same way I used to make it. It wasn't about celebration. It was about reclaiming what had been lost. Family, laughter, quiet conversation. After dinner, he stood by the window, looking out at the fading light. Mom, he said softly, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did to you. I set down my teacup and walked toward him.
No, Ryan, I said.
You don't need to make it up to me. You just need to remember. He frowned slightly. Remember what? That love and truth are the same thing, I said. One can't survive without the other. He turned to me, his eyes glassy with emotion. You always make it sound so simple. It is, I whispered. It just hurts to learn it. That night, after he left, I stepped outside into the cool air. The sky was clear, the stars finally visible after so many weeks of clouds. I could still hear the faint ticking of the watch inside, steady and strong. It reminded me that life doesn't stop when people betray you. It pauses until you're ready to begin again. I looked at the little garden, the soft lights glowing from my window, and thought about how far I had come. From humiliation to peace. From silence to truth. The pain hadn't disappeared. It had simply found its place in the story of who I was. For the first time since my husband died, I whispered into the night, "We made it through, didn't we?" The wind stirred gently through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and something almost like forgiveness. And as I stood there, breathing it all in, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a quieter, better one. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, spreading across the small wooden table where my cup of coffee sat untouched. Outside, the garden Ryan and I had planted was coming to life, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, defying the cold. Every time I looked at them, I saw proof that even after being buried, something good could still rise. It had been 3 months since the verdict. Life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Early mornings, walks by the lake, and long phone calls from Ryan, who made sure I never spent another holiday alone. He had sold the big house in the city, the same one that had once been filled with laughter, lies, and broken trust, and used the money to start over in a smaller home nearby. Sometimes he'd drive over just to have dinner with me, bringing flowers or fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Each time he'd say, "You're still my home, Mom." I didn't need to hear the words, but they always made me smile. One evening, he came by with a photo album. We sat by the fireplace, turning the pages together. There were pictures of him as a child, birthdays, old holidays, the camping trip his father had taken him on. I could see it in his face, the boy who used to run to me after every scraped knee, who believed I could fix anything. When he turned the page to a photo of the three of us, me, him, and his father standing in front of our old house, his eyes welled up. "I want to be the kind of man Dad would have been proud of," he said quietly. I placed my hand on his. "You already are," I said. "Because you faced the truth, even when it hurt. That's what makes a man strong, not perfection, but honesty." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I learned that from you." After he left that night, I stood outside on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool and still, the kind that makes you want to breathe a little deeper. I thought about everything that had happened, the Thanksgiving dinner, the humiliation, the long days of silence, the courtroom, and now this quiet peace. It all felt like pieces of a larger story that had finally found its ending. But the truth was, endings aren't always sad. Sometimes they're just beginnings that have learned patience. I sat down in my rocking chair, watching the sky turn gold, then purple, then deep blue. The world felt still, almost reverent, as if it, too, understood the weight of what had been restored. As the first stars appeared, I whispered softly into the open air, Words I'd carried for months, but had never said aloud. Truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't just destroy lies. It rebuilds souls. The wind brushed gently against my face, like an answer. I closed my eyes and smiled, feeling that quiet truth settle in my heart like the final note of a long, beautiful song. Because in the end, life had taught me one thing. No matter how deep the betrayal, how long the silence, or how heavy the pain, truth always finds its way home. And this time it found mine. Sometimes, life takes everything from you, your home, your dignity, even your voice, but if you hold on long enough, truth finds a way to speak for you. This was my story, and if it touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like mine. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child had believed a lie over you? I'll be waiting to read your answers.